Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon and welcome to tonight's episode of Talking Point. With us, we have a very distinguished guest today, a writer, a traveler, but no, he's not Ibn Battuta, if you thought of him like that. But he's a modern Ibn Battuta. He's exploring places that people have gone and come back and narrated it to their friends. But he has gone one step forward, that he has come back, not only just narrated it, but he has written about it, see. And that is how his book, Minarets in the Mountains, was compiled and published. He has been awarded, appreciated for this very interesting work. And must I say, I did enjoy reading it. Tariq, what are you up to now?
Oh, what am I not up to is really the question, Niaz. Thank you firstly for having me on. It's always wonderful to come and spend time with you. So to be honest, I'm working on a few projects. You know, us writers, we have to earn our crust in some capacity because the writing doesn't do it by itself. So I'm doing some heritage work in southwest London, which is kind of a part-time job on a Victorian explorer and his tomb. But in terms of writing, I'm doing the follow-up to Minarets in the Mountains, which is my next big book that is going to be coming out towards the end of this year, where I'm just like I did with Minarets in the Mountains, I've traveled to several places in Europe to tell the story of Islam in Europe.
Which particular country did you visit when you said several places?
For this new one, so in many ways, because those of your viewers who have read Minarets in the Mountains will know that Minarets in the Mountains is very much about the kind of living indigenous European Muslims, which is something many people believe doesn't exist. But of course we have all of these Muslims who are as European as anybody else in places like Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Albania, Serbia, and so on. And this is the Balkan region. And in my first book, in Minarets, I really explore their communities, their culture, and their history. With this new one, I am going back to the beginning of when Islam first makes its way into Europe. And in order to do that, of course, I had to visit the Mediterranean basin. Because this is the area in which Muslims first arrive. So I go to Cyprus, I go to Sicily, I go to Malta, I go to Portugal, and of course, I go to Spain. And so the narrative in the next book is about going back to the beginning and trying to appreciate how and why Islam came to Europe, and then trying to understand and appreciate the impact it had.
What sort of impact? I mean, was it on the just cuisine, living, language, faith?
It was far-reaching, Niaz, and I guess one of the reasons I felt I needed to write it, and actually you've introduced me as a bit of an Ibn Battuta, but I don't want to say Ibn Khaldun because that's just right up there, but I'm definitely going to be, this book is going to be put forward as a history book. Because although it is a journey, the purpose of the journey is to tell what I believe is a very neglected part of our European history. You know, this isn't me trying to tell people that European history is entirely Islamic. No. I'm basically saying that European history has a huge Islamic segment to it. And in going back, I'm showing that it has impacted the way in which Europe evolved in many, many ways, not just linguistically, as you've pointed out, not just culturally, but there are also, of course, wonderful, wonderful monuments left across this region. Not many, I'm afraid, and I talk about why that was. But of course, many of your viewers will know about the wonderful scientific advances, the wonderful advances in health, medicine, arts. You know, all of these things, I feel, are very underappreciated. And this next book is an attempt to try and show just how badly this has been misrepresented and neglected.
People have been talking about writers and speakers that not due consideration, not due regard, not due appreciation has been made for the contribution of Muslim contribution to the arts and sciences, particularly that influences us today.
Absolutely.
all this technology wouldn't have been possible.
No, absolutely not. You know, we have many scientists, many men of medicine, whether we are talking about people like Ibn Sina, whether we're talking about Al-Bukhasis, who was of course from Cordoba. Then you have Ibn Rushd, who was a great philosopher and a physician also from Spain. A lot of their work essentially became the foundations of what was later known as the Renaissance. And in the book I also get very angry about this idea that there was one single Renaissance and it was predominantly Christian. There would have not been a Renaissance had the Muslim Renaissance not arrived in Europe. And actually in between the Muslim Renaissance and the Christian Renaissance, we also have a Judaic Renaissance. And all of this, the Judaic and the Muslim Renaissance gets very much underplayed when we look at Europe's heritage and history. And this Christian Renaissance, which is the Renaissance when we talk about, European history, is often put forward as the bedrock of the later Enlightenment, and then of course modern society as we know it today. But all of it is completely neglecting the foundations, and that's what I'm really trying to, one of the key aspects of the book, of the new book.
The new book. What would you call it?
So the new book is called Muslim Europe, but then it says a journey in search of 1400 years of history. Because of course it may come as a shock to many Muslims even who are listening, and this is part of the issue. It is often popularized that Muslims are somehow new to Europe. So many viewers will assume 1400 years, my God, how is this possible? But actually my book will show that not only is it 1400 years old, but some of the most revered members of our earliest community, the people we know as the the companions, those who came after the companions, the Sahaba, the Tabi'in, all of these individuals, many of them are actually buried here in Europe. And yet it comes as a shock to us when we speak about Islam being, 1400 years old here in Europe.
The usual expression is we are the most misunderstood religions, see. But if we are misunderstood, it's not because of somebody else's fault, but we have not been able to explain things to others.
Yes, I mean, often when we began, when you did my wonderful introduction, you mentioned Ibn Battuta. I threw in Ibn Khaldun. We are always talking about ancient figures. These men, these great men, and of course there were great women as well who I tried to speak about in my next book as well. These great Muslims, they are so far in our past. I think that goes some way to explaining why, as you say, we do not dominate the narrative. We do not have control of the narrative. We are not telling our histories in the way they should be told. And as a result, certainly in Europe, the popular perception is, for some very strange reason, that Europe is some kind of Judeo-Christian construct, which is an absolute nonsense when you look into European history, even through the Eurocentric lens, because that suggests it was some kind of cozy alliance between the Jews of Europe and the Christians of Europe. And if we look back at history, the Christians of Europe consistently tried to murder the Jews. So this is a nonsense in itself as well.
I'm sure that you have come across this. A long time ago, I worked on comparative linguistics and the presence of Arabic words in English and how they came into English and the presence of English words in Arabic. There are more than 1,000 words. Sometimes the meanings have changed. Sometimes the usage has changed. Sometimes the pronunciation of the word, how the words are written, change. But they're still there. It's only for somebody to point out that look, this is Arabic. See, the admiral.
Of course.
Amir al-Bahar.
That's right.
The balcony.
Absolutely.
So far.
Absolutely.
See, assassin. All these words.
But here's the wildest thing about it, Niaz. Not only are there words in European languages, you've spoken about English, Spanish people will tell you how many they have in Spanish, Portuguese people will tell you how many they have in Portuguese, but actually there is a European language,
Yes.
which is still Arabic.
Yes.
This is the wildest thing about it. So my reason for going to Malta, as I explained at the top of the program, is because the Maltese language is the closest we probably have to a European Arabic language, because it is predominantly the remnants of what is known as the Siculo-Arabic, the Sicilian Arabic that was spoken in and around the Emirate of Sicily during the medieval period, and it has remained very much preserved by the tongues of the Maltese. So any Arab that goes to Malta is always, floored by the amount that they can understand of what the Maltese are saying. In fact, the Tunisians, who are just around the corner and also have a strong tie to Italy, their language is mixed, their Arabic is mixed in such a similar way. Many Tunisians, including my brother-in-law, claim they can understand Maltese almost word for word at times. So it's not just words that are borrowed. We have an Arabic European language.
Right, you see. It's very much like Swahili and Arabic.
Indeed, indeed. It's that wonderful evolution. And it's those kind of narratives about the evolution of language, the evolution of food, the evolution of even music. When we start looking into this, the things like the troubadours, who are considered such a key part of the evolution of Western European music, it's almost kind of blanket accepted that their inspiration comes from that Mediterranean basin when the Arabs turn up with the music. All of these evolutionary narratives are no longer a part of our understanding of European history, and this is why it's such a tragedy for me, for many Europeans who are Muslims, and for Europeans who aren't Muslims, because it means their understanding of their history is incomplete as well.
Did you come across, do they use this Arabic script in Malta? Or
No. They use the Latin script, and of course this is one of the deceptive elements of it. But honestly, when you are, I was very fortunate. I spent when I was in Malta, I spent it with some wonderful people. My time there doing the research, and one of them, she was actually mixed. So her father is Lebanese and her mother was Maltese, and spending time with her, she can speak Arabic, she can speak Maltese. It was just hilarious the amount of times where she would switch to Maltese and I would be thinking she's still speaking Arabic, and she would switch to Arabic and I was thinking, oh, is she speaking Maltese, because the words were so similar. And of course many times when she was dropping in the odd Arabic or Maltese word, I could understand it, but sometimes I didn't know what it was. Was I understanding the Maltese? Was I understanding the Arabic? So it was really quite an amusing.
That means you understood both.
Absolutely, I did, and I remember the first time I came across this many moons ago when we went on holiday to Malta as a family, and I heard them counting, because the numbers are just Arabic. There is almost no deviation. Anybody who knows the basic counting in Arabic, wahid, itnin, talata, arba, khamsa, sitta, when they hear the Maltese, they'll be like, wait, these guys are speaking Arabic. So yeah, it's.
In your travels, during your travels in Europe, obviously you went to some of those countries where there are minarets.
Yep, absolutely.
and the mountains as well, of course.
Of course.
And how is the normal life of Muslims? I mean, are they really identified as Muslims, or they have just mingled so much that you've got to find out, though this is a Muslim trait and that is not a Muslim trait?
That's a very good question, and there is no one answer, because the experience or the way in which Muslims were apparent to me was different where I went. Now, in the Balkans, if we take that, because that, of course, is the first book. In the Balkans, for example, there are many Muslims who are doing their utmost to rediscover their faith. And we know why. Those of us that have studied recent history know that this region was under communism for a very long time. Not as long as Islam.
Yep.
So Islamic roots are much deeper, but the communism was there for at least 50 to 60 years.
Right.
And this was, in some cases like Albania, this was an aggressive communism, an aggressive anti-religious secular communism. So somebody like Enver Hoxha, who was of course the communist dictator of what is now Albania, he wanted to make Albania the very first atheist country in the world. And so he aggressively outlawed faith, and he also suppressed anybody that tried to observe it. He basically demolished many of the religious buildings. So what we have is we have a situation where even those who wish to acknowledge their faith or practice it, they first have to relearn it. And this is the challenge many are facing. And of course what happens is some are not necessarily that interested now because they have been so secularized. But there is a massive pushback. I don't know if your viewers have recently seen, but you know, a brand new mosque was opened in Tirana recently, in the capital of Albania. And I'm using Albania as an example because this isn't a place most of us think of when we think of a Muslim country, even though it is still majority Muslim. And of course there are also variations of Islam being practiced in these areas as well. So it depends really where you go. Whereas somewhere like Bosnia, Niaz, is very different. They had an infrastructure that was still there, or they were able to revive it because they didn't have the same aggressive they didn't have the same aggressive dictators overseeing overlords. Even when the Austro-Hungarians were in charge, they very much accommodated the Bosnians in their practice of Islam. So, and because they have a lot of their monuments and a lot of the mosques and a lot of the madrasas, they also have a Muftiat Institute which was resurrected. And so in Bosnia we see Islam is really flourishing. In the sense that you know, the Muslims are very proud of their Muslim identity. You have, you know, young Hafiz everywhere. You know, they are producing scholars all the time. In fact, I think it's a very untapped resource for us in Western Europe. We really should look to somewhere like Bosnia for our own kind of, you know, inspiration in that respect.
Right, great. Journey into Muslim Europe. How was this book received?
It was very well received. You know, it was a shock to me, of course. Prior to this, your viewers probably don't know my background. Prior to this, you know, I spent many years teaching. We were speaking off air that we both worked for the same newspaper in Saudi Arabia. Not at the same time, but this is, you know, I was a journalist, went into teaching, and then even when I went back into writing, I did a lot of travel writing, but I was doing mainly, when it came to books, I was mainly focusing on guidebooks. And so this book came out as my first real narrative, like Ibn Battuta style, as you said at the beginning, where I'm telling the story of these places. And I didn't know what to expect, because in telling the story, I was trying to tell people that there is a Muslim Europe. And I wondered just how that would be received, because it's something that people still don't accept. But it was very well received. And of course, as you know, it was long-listed for the biggest non-fiction prize in the country. It was shortlisted for the biggest prize in travel writing, and it ended up winning the British Guild of Travel Writers Book of the Year award. So in that respect, it was very well received.
So that makes you an award-winning author.
Yes. And it puts a lot of pressure on for the second book. You know, the musicians say the second album is always the toughest. So this second book is going to be the toughest one, clearly.
Well, you have done the research for the second book, so it's only the writing that... No,
I've done the writing as well. Yeah, the second book will be coming out by before the end of this year. So you know, it's in a good place. I'm feeling very good about it. And the Muslim cultures that we're going to see in this second book, they'll be very, very different to the to the ones I explored here.
Right. One simple question. In Europe, most interesting and unique place that you have visited so far?
Yeah, that's
30 seconds.
30 seconds. I suppose one of the most interesting and unique has to be Cyprus. One, because it's in my next book and I hadn't explored it properly, and two, because it's one of the only countries still in Europe that is divided, of course. So you have southern Cyprus, which is predominantly Christian, and you have northern Cyprus, which is predominantly Muslim. But I'm sure we can talk more about the culture there in the second segment.
This gentleman who is with us, and I named him as Ibn Battuta, a modern Ibn Battuta. He's been writing about Muslims in Europe, and his next book is about Muslims in Britain, or rather Britain, where all the Muslims are here in this country, and the culture, the traditions, the mosques, the graveyards. Yes, sir. thinking of graveyard. Just solemn. What is this book called?
So the next book, just so it's clear to readers, it's very different to the ones we've been speaking about. It's a guidebook. So it's very practical. If you don't like reading long narratives, this is perfect for you.
Right.
Everything is written very short and snappy, and it's a guide to the Muslim Britain and Ireland.
Right.
So it's actually called Muslim Britain and Ireland, a travel guide to the heritage and culture. So you can imagine it's going to go across both countries,
right,
exploring all the history, and there is so much of it, and it's very, very rich. And we can see it on the screen here.
Right.
There's the cover, and it will be out towards the back end of this year. And on the front cover there, of course, is one of the most significant pieces, Islamic monuments in this country, which is the Shah Jahan Mosque. And now we see on the screen...
The one in Woking, Shah Jahan Mosque.
That's right, the one in Woking. And now we see on the screen one of the earliest Quran manuscripts of Quran.
Is it handwritten?
In the world. Of course it's handwritten. This has been dated, Niaz, to a period that falls within the actual living lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is now sitting in Birmingham.
Subhanallah.
We have this in our country, and most of your viewers probably have no idea it is there.
Which museum?
So this is in the Cadbury Library, which is part of the University of Birmingham. And you can go and see it in the library as if it was in a museum. It's open for people to go and see. That's a facsimile.
Yep.
The original is so sensitive, they don't bring it out unless you are, of course, a bona fide researcher or something like that. But this was written by someone who may well have spoken to the Prophet ﷺ themselves, and may have even heard the words they wrote down from the Rasul himself.
Subhanallah, subhanallah, subhanallah.
Yes.
Could you read?
Oh, it's very difficult because it's a very...
The script is very different.
Yes, and the script is a very ancient script known as a Hijazi script. And for many, many years, these folios, I think there's about 6 pieces, they remained undetected within another book in the library. And it was only because a PhD scholar who is an expert in this area, she discovered that the ones that were on the screen were
so
different.
Yeah.
And they were older, which of course got very exciting. It then got carbon dated by Oxford University, and they confirmed it within, I think it's roughly a 60-year period, and some of that overlaps within the time of the Rasul.
And there's no history about how it landed there in Birmingham.
I've written a brief history of how it might have got there, but there is, of course, no concrete provenance of how it went from the Hijaz to Birmingham. There is a strong likelihood that it is linked to very similar folios that are in Paris. So there's the scholars believe that it may have originally been a part of that collection. But let's be frank, Niaz, one of the other things about this particular book is I also explore how so many Islamic artifacts ended up in the West. And if we're blunt about that, we know that they didn't always come through the most ethical avenues. So one of the aspects of the book that I'm writing, the guidebook that I'm writing, is I visit museums, I visit libraries, and I go and unearth some of these gems. For example, I went to Powys Castle. I know we have a large Bengali audience and they'll be very interested to know this. Powys Castle is in Wales, and I went and saw the actual palanquin of Siraj ud-Dawla, who many of them will know. The actual one taken from the battlefield. I also saw the battlefield tent of Tipu Sultan there, as well as many of his swords. So all of these things are going into the guidebook.
His shirt, long shirt, kurta or Punjabi, what we say.
Of Tipu Sultan?
Yes, Tipu Sultan is I think in Edinburgh Castle.
That's right, that's right. So I was in Scotland and I went to the Edinburgh Castle Museum and I went and saw many things. In fact, we could map a Tipu Sultan trail across Britain because in Cambridge University they have 2 of his absolutely spectacular, stunning Qur'ans taken from his library because he had many, of course. So Tipu Sultan became a very interesting figure while I was doing this journey, because every time I went to places where, let's be blunt, colonial loot is now held still or being displayed in some capacity, always some of the most prized items were from Tipu Sultan. You know, so this was a very, very interesting emergence from my research up and down the country for the book. And of course, I also went to Ireland as well. Ireland has a very fascinating Islamic heritage and history as well. But one of the most amazing things about Ireland is Dublin Castle is home to a place called the Chester Beatty Library. Or Chester Beatty Museum. I can't remember. They changed the name from the 2 times I visited. Not many people realize this has the finest collection of Islamic manuscripts probably in the Western Hemisphere. And it's sitting there in Dublin, and most people I speak to, even people who are very well informed about Muslim heritage and Muslim manuscripts and artifacts across the Western Hemisphere, a lot of people don't realize this gem. And it's free to visit. You know, you can go and see Qurans the size of a man, you know, on display in this place. You can see Mughal miniatures. You can see, you know, Mamluk Qurans. You can see poetry by Hafiz. You know, all of these manuscripts were collected by Chester Beatty, who was an American-Irish magnate who was collecting these things long before it was fashionable, and he left it to his hometown, the city of Dublin.
Well, it's good that it's there. It's been, at least, I mean, I feel that way, that it has been borrowed from somewhere and it's being preserved. Otherwise, it may have been lost.
I think borrowed is a very interesting term.
Yep.
I think in some cases, I will also say that sometimes it was quite an emotional journey for me. I would sit, I remember sitting in Trinity Library, which is in Dublin, Trinity College Library in Dublin, and opening some of the Qur'ans that were taken from various moments, and one of them, you know, was taken from the siege of Delhi, which I can't remember exactly when. Yes, around that time. And you know, it was the wording just made me very emotional, angry, but also sad. You know, it was the idea that, you know, you completely decimate the place, but you only took it. You didn't steal it. You didn't thieve it. You didn't loot it. The language is very interesting, and semantics is very interesting. And as a writer, of course, this is what it's all about, semantics. You know, the word we use to describe things. And part of my writing is about using the word that I believe should be used and the correct term. So if it's loot, I'm going to call it loot. If it's been stolen, I'm going to say that it's stolen, which I think hasn't always been done.
This is your...
Yeah, and now this is the article that I wrote recently, and now we're talking about more modern heritage here. It's been labelled a love letter to Sylheti food, because of course the Sylheti Bangladeshis are responsible for converting the entire country to what we call Indian food. But let's be blunt, it's not quite Indian, it's more Anglo-Indian. And this love letter really, this article I wrote for Condé Nast Traveller, is really just talking about the way in which Sylhetis are now reclaiming the food narrative, especially along Brick Lane, because I wrote it about the growing number of traditional Sylheti village food restaurants that are popping up across Brick Lane, and they are far more popular now, especially amongst our generation of British Bangladeshis, than the Anglo-Indian ones.
Right.
And you know, for me, as many of our viewers
this is
know,
another picture.
yeah, this is the article, and you can see the chef in the top left-hand corner preparing the food, and you can see things like this is the food of the villages. You see the borta on the right-hand side, the front on the left. You probably see some khalabuna, and of course you also have a picture of the gate to what is now finally being called Bangla town, but only written in Bangla.
Yes.
So even many of the British Bangladeshis can't read it.
But I think it's in English now.
No, on the gate it's only in Bangla.
Really?
It's only in Bangla, which I think is quite an interesting way to sort of appease the Bangladeshis, but not quite, you know, because it was, I don't know how much you know about the lane and its history, but I think it was meant to have been called Bangla Town many decades ago, but it became so popular with the non-Bangladeshi crowd that I think that got shelved, because of course many moons ago, if you look, the names of the streets were all translated into Bengali, but nothing else happened, and we got the lamps and they were painted red and green, and we got the gate, but the branding didn't go the whole way. And recently on the 50th anniversary, of course, they put Bangla Town in Bengali on the gate, and one of my someone who's now become a friend, Muhammad Ali, who's a Bangladeshi graffiti artist. He painted the wonderful mural of the Bangladeshi boatman next to the gate as part of the anniversary. And so the article is really about talking about how Brick Lane has come to represent all that we pine for. Because on that painting that Muhammad Ali created, he wrote in Bangla, Matir Tan, which of course is something when I was a child, our parents would say is the reason they kept going back to Bangladesh. Because of course we were children, we were like, why do we have to keep going back there? Why can't we go on holiday somewhere interesting? You know, because we didn't understand. And they would say, it's because of the Matir Tan. And myself and Muhammad Ali, who did the painting, we speak about how we didn't understand what that meant. Now we understand. And for me, the food that the Siletis are now producing from the villages, you know, cooking the fish that we love to eat, cooking the meat the way we like to eat it, cooking the bortas the way we like to eat it. For me, that is what helps to kind of, soothe that Matitan.
This is Bosnia.
Yes, and this is what I'm doing next. You were asking, what are you up to? So I was finally convinced by a travel company to do one of these author trips.
Right.
So they created an itinerary through Bosnia based on minarets in the mountains, which we spoke about in the first half.
Right.
And I'm going along, and the people who are coming on the trip, they get to meet me, and I'll be giving a talk. But then they go and visit many of the sites with the book in hand, and it becomes an immersive experience.
Great.
That is minarets in the mountains.
It's very interesting. It's
Yes,
very interesting.
yes.
I think that these kind of visits should be arranged for most of us visiting even Muslim countries.
Absolutely.
Because we go there and we get a superficial view of things, and we come home a lot of bhuna gosht and aloo bhatta and all that, and then we come home.
Yeah, if I may be so frank, often when people realize I'm a travel writer and a Muslim travel writer, they're like, oh, I need to speak to you, I'm going somewhere. And of course at first I used to think they want some nuggets about the Islamic heritage, where to go and see the most stunning madrasa or the relics of some. They want to know where the halal food is. They think I'm a halal food directory. I'm like, Google will tell you that. Yeah. If you want the really interesting stuff, then come and ask me. But you're right, we do have, often we're traveling very superficially. But I would argue, Niaz, this is one of the reasons why we need to start doing this work. We need to do this research. We need to write these things so that people can have that experience. Because the people who traditionally wrote the guidebooks for travel, the people who traditionally wrote the travel narratives, it's not of interest to them because they were not Muslims. The ones I'm talking here, obviously, those who wrote in the English language.
Right.
Like we said earlier, Ibn Battuta died 7 centuries ago. You know, who's writing it now? So if we're not writing about this stuff, the people who go on these journeys, who travel to these places, how are they supposed to know what's in front of them? They can only read something that may have been put up by a tourist board or something, and we know what the tourist boards in our historic countries are like. So the information is hardly going to give them an immersive experience. And so I think it's important.
Going back to Brick Lane.
Yes.
Now we are second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation of Bangladeshi British. Do you think Brick Lane still holds that kind of importance in our lives?
I think it has to hold that kind of importance because also we have to remember the political role. Brick Lane is more than just a street. Brick Lane is a piece of history. When you say Brick Lane, immediately it evokes a lot of things. You know, we have our great martyr, Al-Tabali, at one end of Brick Lane, and at the other end, of course, you have the pre-Bangladeshi heritage of the Jewish bagel and the
mosque.
Yeah, the bagel shop. And let's not forget the mosque. And this is actually a very interesting piece of heritage that I also believe has been completely forgotten. The way in which the first generation of Bangladeshis coexisted and lived side by side with the Jews of Brick Lane is another narrative that has been completely lost. Almost like the Spanish would call it a convivencia. A miniature version in the East End. It's not just the Brick Lane Mosque. If you go to the East London Mosque, there is a synagogue building built within it almost. Of course, the synagogue building came first. The point I'm making, though, ultimately is Brick Lane, with the work that people, not just myself, but others working in heritage, local council, the way in which that they are trying to, the way in which they are trying to basically preserve this history, I think is very, very important, because it's a part of our identity, certainly as British Bangladeshis here in the East End of London. You know, this is where many of them came, this is where the finest restaurants were first developed, this is where the battles took place, this is where the NF marched through. I remember as a child watching the NF march through Brick Lane. This is where they would canvass, this is where they wanted to kick us out of, but we stayed, and we've made it something beautiful that is larger than us.
Right.
Now people come from all over the world, and they don't just come to see the graffiti that was done by the hipsters last week. They also come to see our heritage, and it's something I think we shouldn't just allow to slip away.
They come for the best halal food.
Absolutely, the best halal food in the country for sure. My Birmingham friends are going to be very angry we said that. You know, but, yeah.
Well, this we means all of us.
Absolutely, of
it
course.
includes them.
Absolutely, yes, indeed, certainly does.
What is the percentage of Bangladeshi owned shops in Brick Lane?
I haven't looked at the statistics, but a large number of the businesses, even if they are no longer, because let's be honest, a business is a business, it has to make money. Yes. And so in order to diversify, I can only speak of my own friends who own businesses along there. They have switched from having maybe 4 restaurants that are serving Indian food to one that still serves Indian food and does a really good trade, but then they may have started to do other kinds of food, like a vegan restaurant or a Thai restaurant or something like that, because they recognize that the clientele coming down the lane now is a much more diverse clientele. They want to eat different types of food. If every restaurant is Indian, they don't stick around. They don't necessarily stick around. So I don't think all of them are necessarily Indian restaurants, but I think the businesses are still largely owned by British Bangladeshis.
That's very good. That's very good. What does it take to make a travel writer?
What does it take to make a travel writer? Somebody who has a lot of money, which I don't have. No, but in all honesty, I jest. But the reality is, if you do want to be a travel writer, the reality is that there isn't much money in writing, full stop. We both know this as writers. There's certainly not much money in book writing. And so it's no surprise that our young Muslims or Bangladeshis that are making money in travel, they're doing it in social media. Because this is where the money is. And so in terms of becoming a travel writer, it's a very different pathway. You know, you have to be somebody who is willing to do a lot of research. You have to be somebody who's confident traveling on your own, going to places that maybe other people haven't gone to, asking questions and bringing this all back and then developing an interesting narrative, which, as you can see from the way I've described it, is a very lengthy process, at the end of which the youngsters will tell you, what, you only have a book? Whereas, of course, the young people today, during that journey, they may have made 5 or 6 YouTube episodes. They may have made lots of Instagram posts, and which is what I'm very bad at. That's another reason I have no money, you know. Whereas this is what a lot of young people are doing now. So I think to be a travel writer today, you have to be very savvy in that respect as well.
Right. Probably this should be the last question. What makes travel writing unique?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you why. I chose travel writing initially to tell history because I feel like travel writing is one of those genres of being, it's not very offensive, it's not very hard like history is, and yet if you are a clever writer, you can weave in the most amazing history as you show people places. And before they know it, they've read your book and they've learned all this Islamic history and they didn't even realize they'd learnt it. So this is what I think is the beauty of travel writing. It takes you places without you leaving your armchair, through your imagination and of course the writer's skill, but also teaches you things that normally you might have to read a very heavy, dense textbook for.
Right. Despite the warning that new or would-be writers will feel about what you have just said, what would you advise to anybody not experienced writers, but anybody who wants to be a writer and a travel writer.
Yeah. Well, one of the nice things right now, let's put the finances aside, one of the nice things is getting published. You have so many platforms now.
Right.
Getting published isn't as difficult as it was when maybe you and I began writing many, many moons ago. So I think it's easy to get published. So get yourself published. Get as much published as possible in as many places as possible. Build up that portfolio. And then, of course, you can go to the more established brands. You can go to the Lonely Planets of the world, the BBCs of the world, and you can get yourself published by the big hitters and become recognized as a travel writer.
Right. Taking a step backwards, going back to Bangladesh, how is travel writing developing there?
There is no travel writing as far as I have seen in the English language. I do not read Bangla, as in I'm not reading Bangla literature, so I don't want to offend an entire cohort of Bengali writers out there who may be doing it in Bengali. But Bangladesh is one of those black spots when it comes to travel literature, which I hope to fill one day. You know, I hope that one day I can go and write the travel book on Bangladesh, because quite frankly there isn't one. You know, none of the historic travel writers have actually written one traveling around Bangladesh. There's even ones on Pakistan. Of course, there are millions on India, you know, because it's the romantic place. But Bangladesh is really lacking.
Thank you for that, for coming along and sharing your views with us and all the important information, I must say, useful information that you shared with us and our viewers.
And thank you so much for having me on, Niaz. It's been a joy.
Thank you. We hope to meet again and again and again.
Yes.
and when the book comes out, we must meet again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, viewers, for being with us, and we hope that you've enjoyed the show as much as we have in producing it. And my thanks to our technical team and to those who have helped set up this today. Thank you.